My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I was 34 the year my husband and his mother decided that my late father's life work was the perfect collateral to fund my sister-in-law's delusions. I was 3,900 miles away, in a Frankfurt hotel room, auditing a European corporate merger, when an automated email from a commercial insurance broker alerted me that the policy on my property had been successfully canceled and reissued under a new corporate entity. My husband, Julian, would later stand in a room full of furious investors and claim he was just trying to optimize our dormant assets for the family's collective growth. He had absolutely no idea that while he was practicing his tech bro buzzwords, I had spent 6 weeks turning his financial optimization into a federal indictment. To understand how Julian Brooks managed to steal a commercial warehouse out from under my name, you have to understand the fundamental difference between the family I came from and the family I married into. I am a forensic data architect. When a multinational corporation buys another company, they hire me to integrate their massive, chaotic databases. My job is to look at millions of lines of unstructured code, find the anomalies, purge the rot, and build a system that can withstand pressure. I do not deal in approximations. I deal in hard data, verifiable timestamps, and absolute truths. My father, Arthur Hayes, was cut from the exact same cloth. He was a commercial contractor in New Jersey who spent 40 years wearing steel-toed boots and drinking diner coffee. He didn't understand the stock market, and he certainly didn't understand tech startups, but he understood concrete, steel, and land. When I was 22, he took his life savings and purchased a 40,000 square foot industrial warehouse in a gritty, unremarkable logistics park in New Jersey. The world will always need a place to put boxes, Ellie. He told me the day we walked through the empty, echoing space. He placed the deed in a manila folder and handed it to me. It isn't glamorous. Nobody is going to write a magazine article about a corrugated steel roof, but it will pay you on the first of the month, every month, for the rest of your life. He placed the property into a holding company called Hayes Industrial LLC, naming me as the sole managing member. When he passed away 3 years later from a sudden heart attack, that warehouse became the only physical piece of him I had left. I never touched the principal. I let the leasing income flow into a dedicated account, reinvesting the surplus into maintenance. To me, that building wasn't an asset. It was a monument to a man who believed in keeping your head down and doing the work. Julian Brooks did not believe in keeping his head down. Julian believed in the power of the pitch. Julian ran a boutique venture consultancy firm, which was a polite way of saying he charged desperate founders exorbitant fees to introduce them to people he had met at country clubs. He was devastatingly charming, perpetually dressed in cashmere quarter zips, and completely averse to anything resembling actual labor. But the true center of the Brooks universe was his mother, Sylvia. Sylvia was a woman who navigated life as if she were directing a stage play in which she was the tragically unappreciated star. She was obsessed with the concept of the Brooks family legacy, despite the fact that the family's wealth was largely a mirage built on heavily leveraged credit and past-due country club memberships. And then there was Chloe. Chloe was Julian's younger sister, the undeniable golden child. At 28, Chloe had launched Aura, a luxury wellness and lifestyle brand that sold $90 candles and aggressively beige loungewear. Aura was Sylvia's pride and joy. It was featured on Chloe's curated social media feeds, heavily promoted at local charity galas, and, according to the Brooks family narrative, poised to disrupt the wellness space. According to my quiet, informal analysis of their public filings, Aura was a catastrophic cash sinkhole. When Julian and I got married, I made a conscious choice to keep my finances entirely separate from the Brooks ecosystem. I paid exactly half the mortgage on our Boston townhouse. I paid for my own car. And I never, ever mentioned the warehouse in New Jersey to Sylvia or Chloe. Julian knew about it, of course, but I made it explicitly clear that Hayes Industrial LLC was a closed loop. For 4 years, the Brooks family treated me as a useful, if slightly boring, appliance. I was the stable one. I was the one who quietly handled the logistics when Sylvia's holiday parties went over budget. I was the one who absorbed Julian's frequent bouts of entrepreneurial burnout without complaining. They confused my lack of drama for a lack of backbone. They assumed that because I didn't demand the spotlight, I wouldn't notice if they started taking things out of the shadows. The dinner that started the fire. The catalyst for the theft occurred on a rainy Tuesday in early October, exactly 3 weeks before I was scheduled to leave for a massive 6-week auditing project in Frankfurt. Sylvia had summoned us to her home for dinner. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Chloe was sitting at the dining room table, staring red-eyed into a glass of Pinot Noir. Julian was pacing the Persian rug, running his hands through his hair. Sylvia stood at the head of the table, projecting the aura of a general facing an unjust defeat. "The suppliers are being entirely unreasonable," Sylvia announced as I sat down. "They are demanding a 6-figure payment by the end of the month, or they are threatening to freeze the entire holiday inventory for Aura. It's extortion, pure and simple." I remained quiet. I knew exactly what it was. It wasn't extortion. It was a vendor enforcing a net 60 payment term on a client who hadn't paid a bill since June. Chloe sniffled. "If we don't get the holiday launch out, the angel investors are going to pull their bridge funding. Aura will go under. Everything I've built will just be gone." "That is not going to happen," Julian said firmly, playing the role of the protective older brother. "We just need a short-term liquidity injection. A bridge over the bridge." Sylvia turned her gaze slowly toward me. It was the look of a woman who had just remembered she owned a spare tire in the trunk of her car. "Eleanor, darling," Sylvia said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Julian mentioned that your little industrial property in New Jersey has been fully leased for years, and it's completely unencumbered, isn't it? No mortgage at all?" Every alarm bell in my nervous system began to ring simultaneously, but my face remained perfectly blank. "It is owned free and clear, yes. My father hated debt." "Well, thank God for Arthur's old-fashioned sensibilities," Sylvia said, waving a hand dismissively. "Because we have found the perfect solution. If you were to take out a commercial equity line of credit against that warehouse, we could clear Aura's vendor debt tomorrow. The business would easily pay you back with interest by Q1 of next year. It's a completely internal family transfer. A win-win." I looked at Julian. He was deliberately avoiding my eyes, studying the intricate pattern of his mother's antique wallpaper. He had fed her the information. He had offered up my father's concrete legacy to plug the holes in his sister's sinking vanity project. "No," I said. It was a single syllable, spoken at a conversational volume, but it hit the dining room table like a brick. Chloe stopped sniffling. Sylvia's artificial smile froze on her face. "No?" Sylvia repeated, as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "Eleanor, I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation. Chloe is on the verge of a breakthrough. Family supports family. We all paddle the same boat." "We are not in the same boat, Sylvia," I replied evenly. "Aura is an LLC, and Hayes Industrial is an LLC. I am not a stakeholder in Aura, and my father's property is not a family piggy bank. I will not leverage a revenue-generating asset to pay off delinquent vendor debt for a failing retail brand. The answer is absolutely, unequivocally, no." The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe burst into fresh, loud tears and ran out of the room. Sylvia stood up, her face flushed with genuine, unrestrained anger. "You have always been selfish, Eleanor," Sylvia hissed, her true colors finally showing. "You sit there with your spreadsheets and your cold little heart, acting superior. You are a Brooks, by marriage, but you have never understood what it means to be part of this family." "I understand perfectly," I said, standing up and picking up my coat. "It means being willing to set yourself on fire to keep Julian and Chloe warm. I'll see you at home, Julian." I left the house. When Julian finally came home 3 hours later, the fight was vicious, though entirely one-sided. He yelled about unity, about my lack of vision, about how I was humiliating him in front of his mother. I simply sat on the edge of the bed and let him run out of breath. "I am not signing away my father's building, Julian. That is final." For the next 3 weeks the house was a tundra. Julian was short with me, playing the role of the wounded martyr. I didn't care. I was hyper-focused on preparing for my deployment to Frankfurt. My firm was sending me to untangle the digital architecture of two merging German banks. It required my absolute concentration. The day before my flight, Julian's demeanor suddenly shifted. The icy resentment vanished, replaced by the charming, supportive husband I had met 5 years ago. He made me dinner. He offered to drive me to the airport. "I'm sorry about how things went down with my mother," he said softly, handing me a glass of wine in our kitchen. "You were right. It's your asset. I was just stressed about Chloe. I've told them we can't help, and they are working out another solution." I looked at him carefully. I wanted to believe him. The human brain is wired to seek the path of least resistance, to accept the comforting lie over the complicated truth. I took the wine. I kissed him. I told him I loved him. I boarded a transatlantic flight the next morning, leaving my husband alone in my house, with unrestricted access to my home office. The digital smoke alarm Frankfurt was a grueling marathon of corporate data. I lived in a cycle of hotel coffee, sterile conference rooms, and complex SQL databases. The time difference meant I only spoke to Julian briefly in my evenings, which were his mornings. He was always cheerful, always busy, telling me that things at his consultancy were booming and that Chloe had miraculously found an angel investor to save her holiday launch. "See?" I told him over FaceTime during my 3rd week away. "She figured it out. She didn't need my warehouse after all." "Exactly." Julian smiled, his teeth perfectly white against the grainy pixelation of the screen. "You were totally right to hold your ground, Ellie. Proud of you." 2 weeks later, exactly 35 days into my trip, my phone vibrated on the desk of my hotel room. It was 11:30 p.m. in Germany. I glanced at the screen. It was an automated email from Zurich, North America, the commercial insurance carrier that covered my New Jersey warehouse. Subject: Confirmation of policy cancellation policy, number ZN-88492-N. JJ. I frowned. I hadn't requested a cancellation. I opened the email. "Dear Eleanor Hayes, as per the instructions received from your authorized representative, commercial property policy number ZN-88492-NNJ for the premises located at 400 Industrial Parkway has been successfully canceled effective immediately. Please note that a new policy has been bound for this location under the entity Aura Holdings LLC. If you have any questions, please contact your broker." The air in my hotel room suddenly felt very cold, as if someone had opened a window to the freezing German winter outside. I didn't gasp. I didn't call Julian. In my line of work, when a system flags a critical error, you don't call the person you suspect introduced the malware. You isolate the network, you pull the logs, and you find the back door. I opened my laptop. My hands were perfectly steady. I logged into my secure VPN and navigated directly to the New Jersey Division of Revenue and Enterprise Services portal. I paid the $50 expedited fee to pull the most recent business entity status report for Hayes Industrial LLC. The document loaded on my screen. Under the Managing Members section, my name was no longer alone. Exactly 12 days after I had boarded my flight to Europe, a new operating agreement had been filed. It listed Julian Brooks as a co-managing member, granting him full executive authority to enter into contracts, leverage assets, and transfer property on behalf of the LLC. "You arrogant idiot," I whispered to the empty room. I didn't stop there. I went to the Cumberland County Clerk's online property records portal. I searched the address of my father's warehouse. There it was, a quitclaim deed, filed and recorded just 8 days ago. Grantor: Hayes Industrial LLC. Authorized signatory: Julian Brooks. Co-managing member: Grantee: Aura Holdings LLC. Consideration: $1. He had given it away. My husband had used a forged operating agreement to hijack my holding company, and then he had legally transferred a $2.5 million fully leased commercial warehouse to his sister's failing candle company for a single dollar. I sat back in my chair. The physiological response to ultimate betrayal is a strange thing. People expect a fiery explosion of rage. But for me, The rage bypassed fire entirely and went straight to absolute zero. My heart rate slowed down. My vision narrowed. The husband I loved was gone, instantly replaced by a hostile data anomaly that needed to be systematically dismantled and destroyed. But how did he file the amended operating agreement with the state? Any change to an LLC's structure requires the notarized signature of the original managing member, me. I pulled up the PDF of the quitclaim deed and the amended operating agreement. I zoomed in on the signature blocks. There was my signature, Eleanor Hayes. It was a flawless forgery. Julian had lived with me for 5 years. He knew my signature intimately. He had broken into the locked filing cabinet in my home office, found the original LLC documents, scanned them, and manufactured a fraudulent amendment. Then I looked at the notary public stamp beside my forged signature. State of Massachusetts, Notary Public, Marcus Vance. Commission expires 2026. Marcus Vance. I knew that name. Marcus was Chloe's ex-boyfriend, a sleazy commercial real estate broker who still desperately wanted to be part of the Brooks family inner circle. Julian had used Marcus to illegally notarize a forged document, swearing under penalty of perjury that I had physically stood in a room in Boston and signed my company away, while I was actually asleep in a hotel in Frankfurt. And I knew exactly why they had transferred the deed to Aura Holdings LLC rather than just taking a loan. Chloe's brand was so toxic, so heavily in debt, that no bank would lend to her, even with collateral. But by transferring a debt-free, revenue-generating commercial property directly onto Aura's balance sheet, they instantly inflated her company's valuation by millions of dollars. That was the angel investor Julian had bragged about. They were using my father's concrete to pad Chloe's fraudulent cap table, preparing to dupe a larger venture capital firm into bailing them out. They had orchestrated a multi-million-dollar corporate theft, and they had done it with the casual, sloppy arrogance of people who believed I was simply too docile, too easy, to ever fight back. I looked at the clock on my laptop. It was 1:15 a.m. in Germany. I created a new, password-encrypted folder on my desktop. I named it audit. Into that folder went the PDF of the forged operating agreement. Into that folder went the fraudulent quitclaim deed. Into that folder went the email from the insurance broker. Then I opened my corporate travel portal. I downloaded the time-stamped receipts of my flight to Frankfurt. I downloaded my hotel check-in logs. I pulled the security badge swipe data from the German bank I was auditing, proving my physical location in Europe on the exact date Marcus Vance swore I was sitting in a Boston office. Every piece of evidence was pristine. Every document was a nail in a coffin they didn't even know they were sleeping in. I had exactly 2 weeks left in Germany before my flight home. 2 weeks to let them believe they had won. 2 weeks for them to leverage the stolen property, sign contracts, and dig the hole so deep that absolutely no one could pull them out. I didn't call Julian. I didn't send a furious text to Sylvia. If I confronted them now, they would scramble. They would try to reverse the transfer, claim it was a misunderstanding, and use Julian's charm to gaslight me into submission. I wasn't going to give them a misunderstanding. I was going to give them a financial execution. I picked up my phone and dialed the international number for a senior partner at a notoriously aggressive corporate litigation firm in Boston, a man who specialized in piercing corporate veils and prosecuting white-collar fraud. He answered on the third ring. "David," I said, my voice as cold and flat as the New Jersey warehouse floor. "I have a corporate identity theft and a fraudulent property transfer that I need to legally paralyze before the end of the month, and I need a referral to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division." I listened to him type on his keyboard on the other end of the line. "Send me the files, Eleanor," David said. "What's the timeline?" "I land in Boston in 14 days, I replied. "I want the trap set the moment my plane touches the tarmac, and David, I want to make sure the collateral damage is absolute." I hung up the phone. Outside the hotel window, the Frankfurt skyline glittered in the dark. I walked over to the minibar, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and went back to work. Julian and Sylvia had spent years calling me the easy one. In 14 days, they were going to find out exactly how difficult I could be. The most dangerous thing you can ever give a thief is the illusion of absolute safety. When a person believes they have successfully gotten away with a crime, they stop looking over their shoulder. They get sloppy. They leave a trail. For the remaining 14 days of my auditing assignment in Frankfurt, I gave my husband, Julian, the greatest gift a forensic data architect could ever bestow upon a target. I gave him my complete, unwavering, and entirely fabricated ignorance. Every morning at 7 a.m. Central European Time, which was 1 a.m. in Boston, I would sit at the small glass desk in my hotel room, open my laptop, and systematically trace the digital footprints of his felony. And every evening, when the time zones aligned, I would answer his FaceTime calls with the warm, tired smile of a wife who missed her husband. The psychological discipline required to look into the eyes of a man who has just stolen your dead father's legacy and ask him how his day was is not something you are born with. It is something you learn when you realize that anger is a liability, but data is a weapon. During those video calls, Julian was in high spirits. The subtle, underlying tension that had plagued him for months was entirely gone. He was wearing his expensive cashmere sweaters, sipping single malt scotch, and talking expansively about how Chloe's wellness brand, Aura, was on the precipice of a massive venture capital breakthrough. He told me that he was working late nights, consulting for his sister, finalizing the pitch decks for a syndicate of angel investors who were clamoring to fund her holiday launch. He spoke with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he was a financial genius. He had no idea that I knew his genius consisted entirely of forging my signature, hijacking my LLC, and artificially inflating his sister's balance sheet with $2.5 million of my family's concrete and steel. I would listen to him brag, nod encouragingly, and tell him how proud I was that the Brooks family was finally catching a break. I played the role of the docile, supportive wife so perfectly that he never once suspected I was spending my nights legally dismantling his entire existence. My first objective during those 2 weeks in Germany was to figure out exactly how deep the rot went. I needed to know if Chloe and Sylvia were merely beneficiaries of Julian's crime, or if they were active co-conspirators. In the world of corporate compliance, intent is everything. If they didn't know the asset was stolen, they were just foolish. If they did know, they were part of a criminal enterprise. I found the answer by doing what I do best, exploiting the digital laziness of arrogant people. Chloe was a lifestyle influencer, which meant she possessed a compulsive need to document her own perceived importance. While she was careful not to post outright financial documents on her social media, she frequently posted aesthetic photos of her founder life. In one of these photos, posted to her business profile a week after the forged deed was filed, Chloe took a picture of a matcha latte sitting on a conference room table. She was trying to show off the expensive boardroom, but she lacked the fundamental operational security to blur the background. Sitting just behind the latte was a printed copy of Aura Holdings' new executive summary. I downloaded the high-resolution image, imported it into my forensic software, and enhanced the text visible on the page. It was a summary of Aura's new capitalization table, and right there, printed in elegant, minimalist font, was a bullet point highlighting the company's newly acquired East Coast distribution and fulfillment hub, valued at $2.5 million, contributed as a zero-cost asset by the company's advisory board. The advisory board was Julian, but a blurry photo of a pitch deck wasn't enough to build a federal case. I needed the actual deck. I needed the digital paper trail. I turned my attention to Marcus Vance, the sleazy commercial real estate broker and Chloe's ex-boyfriend, who had illegally used his notary stamp to legitimize Julian's forged operating agreement. Marcus was not a smart man. He was exactly the kind of mid-level grifter who uses the same password for everything and conducts confidential business on unsecured public networks. I didn't have to hack Marcus. I just had to look up the public registration records for Aura's new investor relations portal. Marcus had registered the domain name for Chloe's virtual data room, the secure site where investors review a company's financials before writing a check. Because Marcus was incompetent, he hadn't properly configured the back-end permissions. The directory was indexed. Sitting in my hotel room in Frankfurt, I quietly downloaded the entire contents of Aura Holdings Series A investor data room. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. Chloe's wellness brand was bleeding cash at an astonishing rate. Her customer acquisition costs were astronomical, and her inventory was sitting in warehouses gathering dust. Without a massive injection of capital, Aura was mathematically guaranteed to declare bankruptcy before Thanksgiving. But the pitch deck painted a completely different picture. By legally transferring the deed of my debt-free New Jersey warehouse onto Aura's books, Julian had transformed a dying candle company into an asset-backed logistics and lifestyle brand. He was using the steady, reliable leasing income from my father's commercial tenants to artificially mask Chloe's catastrophic operating losses. The deck was designed to woo a major Boston-based venture capital firm called Harrison & Cole Ventures, asking them for a $5 million cash injection in exchange for 20% equity. And the most damning document in the entire data room was a signed resolution from the Aura Holdings Board of Directors, consisting of Chloe, Sylvia, and Julian. The document explicitly acknowledged the generous internal family transfer of the New Jersey property from Eleanor Hayes and authorized the use of the property as collateral to secure bridge financing while the venture capital deal closed. They all knew. Every single one of them. Sylvia, who had called me selfish for refusing to leverage my asset. Chloe, who had cried about her failing business. Julian, who had smiled in my face and told me he respected my boundaries. They had all sat around a mahogany table, signed their names to a document they knew was predicated on a felony, and agreed to steal my father's legacy to fund their own delusions of grandeur. I closed the data room files. The clinical coldness inside me solidified into something resembling absolute zero. They were no longer my in-laws. They were targets of a federal audit. I spent the next 3 hours on an encrypted line with David, the senior litigation partner I had retained in Boston. I walked him through the contents of the virtual data room. I could hear him quietly whistling on the other end of the phone as I outlined the sheer audacity of the Brooks family's fraud. "Eleanor," David said, his voice thick with the grim satisfaction of a lawyer who has just been handed a slam dunk case. "This isn't just a quiet title action anymore. By soliciting millions of dollars from a venture capital firm using a fraudulently obtained asset to pad their balance sheet, your husband and his family are actively committing federal securities fraud and wire fraud. If Harrison & Cole Ventures wires them a single dollar based on this pitch deck, Julian is looking at a mandatory minimum sentence." "I don't want them to get the money, David," I replied evenly. "I want the venture capitalists to see exactly who they are dealing with. What is our timeline?" David laid out the strategy with surgical precision. If we filed the lawsuit immediately, Julian would be alerted. He might attempt to destroy documents, pressure the fake notary, or use his family's remaining social capital to drag the litigation out for years in civil court. But if we waited until the exact moment the venture capital deal was supposed to close, the trap would be inescapable. We prepared a multi-pronged legal execution. First, David drafted a notice of lease pendens, a formal public notice that the title to the New Jersey warehouse was under active litigation for fraud. This notice would completely cloud the title, making it legally impossible for Aura Holdings to sell, mortgage, or use the property as collateral. Second, we prepared a comprehensive referral packet for the FBI's white-collar crime division, detailing the forged operating agreement, the fraudulent quitclaim deed, the false notarization by Marcus Vance, and the interstate wire fraud conspiracy. "I have the list pendants ready to file with the Cumberland County Clerk," David told me. "But we need to time this perfectly. When is Aura scheduled to close the funding round with the venture capitalists?" I pulled up an email I had intercepted from the data room. "Chloe is hosting an investor gala and brand relaunch this coming Saturday night in the Seaport District." The email to the lead investor, Richard Harrison, states that they expect to sign the finalized term sheets and execute the funding agreement at the event. "Perfect," David said. "I will file the list pendants on Friday afternoon at 4:55 p.m., 5 minutes before the county clerk's office closes for the weekend. It will hit the public record instantly, but Julian and Chloe won't be checking county property registers on a Friday night. They will walk into their gala on Saturday believing they own a warehouse. But legally, they will be holding a radioactive piece of paper. I thanked David and hung up the phone. I had 3 days left in Germany. I finished my bank integration audit with flawless precision, handed my final report to the German executives, and packed my suitcase. When my flight touched down at Logan International Airport on Thursday evening, Julian was waiting for me at the arrivals terminal. He was holding a bouquet of expensive white lilies. He looked incredibly handsome, radiating the specific relaxed energy of a man who believes all his financial problems have miraculously vanished. "Ellie," he called out, rushing forward to pull me into a tight embrace. "God, I missed you. The house has been so empty." I breathed in the scent of his expensive cologne. I felt his arms around my shoulders, and I felt absolutely nothing. It was like being hugged by a well-dressed ghost. "I missed you too, Julian," I said, offering him a perfectly calibrated smile. "It was a long trip." "Well, you are home just in time," he said, taking my suitcase and guiding me toward the parking garage. "We have a massive weekend ahead of us. Chloe is hosting her investor gala on Saturday night. She did it, Ellie. She secured the bag. A major VC firm is signing a term sheet for $5 million. Aura is going to be a national brand by next year." "That is incredible news," I said smoothly, as I slid into the passenger seat of his car. "How did she manage to convince them? I thought she was drowning in vendor debt." Julian didn't even blink. He merged onto the highway with a casual flick of the steering wheel. "She pivoted the business model. She restructured some internal assets, brought on a logistics advisor, and really optimized her supply chain. The investors loved the new valuation. You know how it is in startups, babe. It's all about the pitch." "Internal assets," I repeated softly, looking out the window at the Boston skyline. "That's very clever." "Sylvia is over the moon," Julian continued, completely oblivious to the trap closing around him. "She wants you there on Saturday. We all do. It's a celebration of the family." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I told him. Friday was a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. I unpacked my bags. I went to the dry cleaners to pick up the emerald green silk dress I intended to wear to the gala. I sat in my home office and quietly inspected the lock on my filing cabinet. To the naked eye, it looked untouched. But when I shined a small tactical flashlight into the keyhole, I could see the minute telltale scratch marks on the brass tumblers. Julian had picked the lock, stolen the original LLC documents, and replaced them without a word. At exactly 4:55 p.m. on Friday afternoon, my cell phone vibrated with a text message from David. "The Eagle has landed. Liz Pendants is officially on the public record in New Jersey. The title is frozen. The FBI packet is sitting on my desk, ready for your signal." I deleted the text message and walked down to the kitchen to help my husband chop vegetables for dinner. Saturday evening arrived with a crisp, cool autumn breeze. The Aura Investor Gala was being held at a breathtakingly expensive rented industrial chic loft in the Seaport District. It was the kind of venue that cost $30,000 just to turn on the lights. As Julian and I stepped out of our Uber and walked toward the entrance, I calculated that the cost of the catering alone was likely funded by a high-interest payday loan secured against the stolen equity of my father's building. The room was a monument to artificial success. There were towering floral arrangements, waiters passing trays of champagne and Wagyu beef sliders, and large, backlit displays showcasing Aura's overpriced candles and loungewear. A string quartet played modern pop songs in the corner. Sylvia spotted us the moment we walked in. She swept across the room in a floor-length silver gown, looking like a monarch receiving her subjects. "Eleanor, darling, you made it back from Europe," Sylvia beamed, kissing the air next to my cheek. She was practically vibrating with triumph. "Isn't it wonderful? Look at what Chloe has accomplished. I told you, family supports family, and the universe rewards vision." "It is certainly a room full of visions, Sylvia," I said, keeping my voice light and pleasant. Chloe was holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows, surrounded by a group of men in expensive suits. She looked radiant, playing the part of the visionary female founder to absolute perfection. Those are the partners from Harrison and Cole, Julian whispered to me, nodding toward the group of men. The older guy with the silver hair is Richard Harrison. He's the lead partner. He's got the term sheets in his briefcase right now. We are doing a private champagne toast and signing the documents in the VIP lounge in about 20 minutes. You must be so proud of yourself, Julian, I said, turning to look my husband directly in the eyes. You really orchestrated all of this, didn't you? Julian puffed his chest out slightly, adopting a posture of modest brilliance. I just helped her optimize her assets. I gave her the leverage she needed. She did the rest. Optimization, I murmured. I adjusted the strap of my clutch purse. Inside the purse was a plain, letter-sized manila folder, folded cleanly in half. It contained 3 pieces of paper. For the next 15 minutes, I stood quietly by the bar, sipping a glass of sparkling water, and watched the Brooks family celebrate the theft of my father's life work. I watched Marcus Vance, the fake notary, laughing loudly with a group of models by the DJ booth, acting as though he were a titan of industry. I watched Sylvia introducing Chloe to local politicians as the next great American entrepreneur. It was a beautiful, flawless illusion, and it was time to turn the lights on. I saw Julian, Chloe, and Sylvia begin to herd Richard Harrison and 2 of his junior partners toward a roped-off VIP section at the back of the loft. There was a low, heavy oak table surrounded by plush leather sofas. A waiter was already pouring a bottle of Dom Perignon into crystal flutes. I set my water glass down on the bar. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald dress, and I began to walk across the room. I didn't rush. I moved with the slow, deliberate cadence of an auditor walking into a hostile boardroom. People naturally moved out of my way, sensing the sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure. As I approached the VIP section, the security guard at the velvet rope held up a hand. Sorry, ma'am. Private signing. Julian looked over and waved the guard off. It's fine, let her in. She's my wife. The guard unclipped the rope. I walked into the enclave. Chloe was sitting on the edge of the sofa, a leather-bound portfolio open on the oak table in front of her. Richard Harrison, the venture capitalist, had a gold Mont Blanc pen in his hand. He was smiling broadly, looking over a stack of heavily vetted financial agreements. Well, Richard Harrison said, his voice booming with the joviality of a man about to make a lot of money. I have to say, Chloe, when we first looked at your burn rate, we were hesitant. But the addition of the New Jersey distribution hub to your balance sheet completely changed the risk profile of this investment. It shows incredible foresight to own your logistics infrastructure outright. A $2.5 million hard asset covers our downside perfectly. Chloe beamed, shooting a grateful look at Julian. We believe in building on a solid foundation, Richard. Excellent, Richard said, uncapping his pen. If everyone is in agreement, let's execute the term sheet, and we'll get the $5 million wired to your operating account by Tuesday morning. He lowered the pen toward the signature line. Richard, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmurs of the VIP section like a scalpel. The pen stopped a fraction of an inch from the paper. Richard Harrison looked up, frowning slightly at the interruption. Julian stepped toward me, his smile tight and warning. Ellie, not right now. We are in the middle of a transaction. I am aware of what you are in the middle of, Julian, I said, bypassing him completely and stepping directly up to the oak table. I looked down at the venture capitalist. Mr. Harrison, my name is Eleanor Hayes. I am a forensic data architect, and I am Julian Brooks's wife. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly confused by the intrusion but too polite to immediately dismiss me. A pleasure, Eleanor. Though your husband is correct, we are just finalizing the capital injection. Before you sign that document, Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice projecting a terrifying, absolute calm. I believe it is my fiduciary duty to inform you that the balance sheet you are looking at is a work of fiction, and the hard asset you just praised does not legally belong to the woman sitting across from you. The VIP section went dead silent. The string quartet playing in the main room suddenly sounded very far away. Chloe's jaw dropped. The color vanished from Sylvia's face. Julian grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my silk dress. Eleanor, what the hell are you doing? Julian hissed, his eyes wide with genuine panic. Are you out of your mind? Apologize to Richard and step outside right now. I looked down at his hand on my arm. If you do not remove your hand from me, Julian, I will have the security guard break your wrist. Julian let go, as if he had been burned. I unclasped my purse. I pulled out the folded manila envelope, flattened it out, and laid it directly on top of the venture capital term sheet, covering the signature line. What is this? Richard Harrison demanded, the joviality entirely gone from his face, replaced by the sharp, predatory instinct of a man who protects millions of dollars for a living. That, I said, looking at the Brooks family, is an audit. I opened the manila folder. I didn't rush. I used the same deliberate, practiced movements I use when I slide a discrepancy report across a boardroom table to a CEO who is about to be fired. Inside were 3 documents, printed on heavy stock paper so they wouldn't curl. I slid the first one directly over Chloe's $5 million term sheet and turned it to face Richard Harrison. This is the quitclaim deed and the amended operating agreement for Hayes Industrial LLC, I told the venture capitalist, my voice projecting a cool, absolute authority. It is the document that supposedly transferred a $2.5 million commercial warehouse in New Jersey onto Aura Holdings' balance sheet. It bears my signature as the sole managing member. Richard Harrison frowned, adjusting his silver-rimmed reading glasses. All right, and I didn't sign it, I said. Julian let out a sharp, breathless laugh that sounded like a dry branch snapping. Richard, please ignore her. My wife has been under an immense amount of stress lately. She's having some kind of episode. Ellie, we are going home right now. Julian reached for my arm again, but Richard Harrison held up a single, perfectly manicured hand. The venture capitalist wasn't looking at Julian. He was looking at me, his eyes narrowing with the sharp, predatory calculus of a man whose entire fortune was built on detecting risk. Let her speak, Julian, Richard commanded. He didn't raise his voice, but the weight of $5 million was behind the words. Julian froze. I slid the second document out of the folder. It was the side-by-side comparison I had built in my Frankfurt hotel room, the high-resolution scan of my passport, the time-stamped logs from the German bank's security servers, and the notary block from the fraudulent deed. The deed was signed and notarized in Boston, Massachusetts on October 28th, I explained, tapping the paper with my index finger. The notary stamp belongs to a man named Marcus Vance, who is currently drinking a martini by your DJ booth. As you can see from my passport stamps and the corporate security logs from my auditing firm, on October 28th, I was physically standing inside a bank vault in Frankfurt, Germany. Richard Harrison picked up the paper. He looked at the passport stamp. He looked at the notary block. The jovial, grandfatherly investor persona vanished instantly, replaced by a terrifying, glacial stillness. Julian, Richard said, his voice dropping an octave. Is this true? Richard, it's a misunderstanding, Julian stammered, the sweat visibly beading on his forehead. It was an internal family restructuring. Eleanor knew about it. She's confused about the timeline. We have internal emails. You don't have anything, Julian, I cut in, my voice slicing through his panic. I looked back down at the investor. They forged my signature to steal my late father's life work, Mr. Harrison. They did it because Chloe's company is carrying 6 figures of delinquent vendor debt and is functionally insolvent. They used a stolen commercial property to artificially inflate her balance sheet, specifically to trick you into signing that term sheet today. Chloe let out a high-pitched, vibrating sob. You liar! You jealous, vindictive liar! Richard, she's just trying to ruin me because she's always hated my family. Sylvia stepped forward, her silver gown shimmering, her face a mask of desperate, aristocratic fury. Mr. Harrison, I apologize for this deeply embarrassing domestic dispute. Eleanor has always struggled with Chloe's success. This property was always intended to be a family asset. We will sort this out privately. Please, let's just proceed with the signing. It was a staggering display of delusion. Sylvia truly believed that her social capital, her tailored gown, and her country club manners could simply overwrite a federal financial crime in front of a Wall Street veteran. Richard Harrison didn't even look at Sylvia. He slowly lowered the documents back onto the oak table. He took off his reading glasses and folded them into his breast pocket. "Mrs. Hayes," Richard said to me, his tone entirely devoid of emotion. "If what you are saying is true, the title to the New Jersey property is clouded. If I wire $5 million into this company, my firm is taking a senior collateral position on a stolen asset." "The title isn't just clouded, Mr. Harrison," I replied. I slid the third and final piece of paper out of my folder. It was the stamped, officially recorded notice of lease pendants from the Cumberland County Clerk. "The title is legally radioactive. My litigation attorneys filed this notice yesterday afternoon at 4:55 p.m. The property is officially frozen under an active fraud investigation. Aura Holdings cannot sell it. They cannot leverage it. And you cannot claim it." I watched Richard Harrison's eyes scan the county clerk's official seal. I watched the math finalize in his head. Venture capitalists understand failure. They expect startups to fail. What they do not tolerate under any circumstances is fraud. Because fraud doesn't just lose their money. It implicates them in federal crimes, triggers SEC investigations, and destroys their firm's reputation. Richard Harrison picked up his gold Mont Blanc pen. He looked at Julian, who was trembling so violently that the ice in his glass was clinking. He looked at Chloe, who was weeping into her hands, and then he looked at the $5 million term sheet. He didn't just cross his name out. He picked up the contract and tore it precisely in half. Then he stacked the halves and tore them again. He dropped the shredded paper onto the table like it was contaminated waste. "You didn't just try to lie to me, Julian," Richard said, his voice a low, lethal whisper. "You tried to make my firm an accessory to federal wire fraud and interstate property theft. If I had wired those funds, my partners and I would be spending the next 3 years sitting in FBI interrogation rooms." "Richard, please," Julian begged, stepping forward, his hands raised in surrender. "We can fix the cap table. We can pull the property off the books. The brand still has value. The holiday launch." "The brand is dead," Richard snapped, cutting him off with the finality of an executioner. "And so is your career. If either of you or anyone representing this fraudulent shell of a company ever attempts to contact Harrison and Cole Ventures again, my general counsel will bury you." Richard turned to his 2 junior partners who were standing frozen in shock. "Pack the briefcases. We're leaving. Now." The 3 men turned and walked out of the VIP section without looking back. They didn't stop to say goodbye to the politicians or the local socialites. They walked straight out the front doors of the Seaport loft, taking the $5 million lifeline with them. The silence they left behind was suffocating. The velvet rope had kept the rest of the party out, but everyone in the immediate vicinity had seen the most powerful man in the room tear up a contract and storm out. The whispers were already starting. Chloe collapsed onto the leather sofa, burying her face in the throw pillows, sobbing hysterically. Her mascara was running down her cheeks, staining the expensive fabric. "It's gone," she wailed. "My company is gone. I'm ruined. I'm completely ruined." Sylvia spun around to face me. The aristocratic veneer was entirely gone, replaced by the vicious, cornered animal I had always known was hiding underneath. "You stupid, vindictive little bitch!" Sylvia screamed, no longer caring who heard her. "Do you know what you just did? You destroyed your sister. You destroyed this family's future over a rotting, ugly warehouse that you don't even need. We could have all been rich." "You are never going to be rich, Sylvia," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "You are going to be inmates." Julian ran his hands over his face, breathing in short, panicked gasps. He looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. The realization of what he had actually done, and who he had done it to, was finally piercing his delusion. "Ellie," Julian choked out, his voice cracking. "Ellie, please, you have to pull the lawsuit. You have to tell the lawyers to drop it. If this goes public, my consulting firm is finished. No one will ever work with me again. We can transfer the deed back tomorrow. I'll sign whatever you want. Please, baby, I'm your husband." I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for 5 years. I looked at the tailored suit he bought with my money, and the panicked tears welling in his eyes. "You haven't been my husband since you picked the lock on my filing cabinet, Julian," I said softly. "But you are right about one thing. This is going public." I picked up my empty folder. The list pendants was just to protect the property, I told him, looking him dead in the eye. The real problem you have is the package my attorney couriered to the FBI's white-collar crime division yesterday morning. They have the forged deed, they have the fraudulent operating agreement, and they have the virtual data room logs proving you used the internet to transmit a falsified pitch deck across state lines to solicit millions of dollars from an institutional investor. Julian stumbled backward as if I had physically struck him. His legs hit the edge of the glass coffee table, and he fell hard onto the sofa next to his weeping sister. FBI? Sylvia whispered, the word barely making it past her lips. The color drained from her face completely. No. Family doesn't do this. We are family. You said it yourself at dinner, Sylvia, I reminded her, keeping my posture perfectly straight. We all paddle the same boat, but I built my boat out of concrete. You built yours out of lies, and now you are going to drown in it. I turned my back on them. I walked out of the VIP lounge. As I crossed the main floor of the Gala, the party was already dying. The news of Richard Harrison's explosive exit had spread like a virus. The catering staff was quietly packing up. The string quartet had stopped playing. I walked past the DJ booth. Marcus Vance, the sleazy real estate broker, was holding a drink and looking confused by the sudden shift in the room's energy. I paused right in front of him. Marcus, I said. He looked down at me, flashing a greasy, practiced smile. Eleanor, hey, crazy night, huh? Where's Julian? Julian is currently crying on a sofa, I said. I just wanted to give you a piece of advice, Marcus. Since you used your Massachusetts notary stamp to legitimize a forged federal document while I was in Germany, I highly recommend you don't leave the state. The FBI hates it when you make them chase you. I didn't wait to watch his smile collapse. I walked out the heavy glass doors of the loft, stepped into the cool Boston night, and ordered an Uber. I went back to the townhouse, packed 2 suitcases of my belongings, took my financial documents, and checked into a suite at the Four Seasons. I ordered room service, took a hot shower, and slept for 9 uninterrupted hours. The justice system is a slow, grinding machine. It does not operate at the speed of a television drama. But when you feed it a perfectly curated, fully documented paper trail, it grinds exceedingly fine. The fallout over the next 2 years was biblical. Aura Holdings collapsed less than 48 hours after the Gala. When the news of the fraudulent pitch deck hit the local venture capital Whisper network, Chloe's creditors panicked. Her unpaid vendors filed involuntary bankruptcy proceedings against the LLC. The warehouse full of $90 candles and beige loungewear was liquidated for pennies on the dollar. Chloe lost everything. She had to move back into her childhood bedroom in Sylvia's house. Her reputation as a visionary founder completely incinerated. But Chloe was the lucky one. She only lost her money and her pride. Julian and Marcus Vance lost their freedom. The FBI investigation was swift and brutal, largely because I had already done their jobs for them. When federal agents raided Julian's boutique consulting firm, they found his laptop, which still contained the digital metadata of the forged operating agreement. Marcus Vance, terrified of federal prison time, immediately flipped on Julian, confessing to the false notarization in a desperate bid for a plea deal. Julian was indicted on 2 counts of federal wire fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. His high-priced defense attorney tried to argue that it was a marital dispute over shared assets, but my pristine LLC documentation and the prenup Julian had arrogantly signed 5 years earlier destroyed that defense. Faced with the reality of a jury trial where I would be the star witness, Julian took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 46 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Marcus lost his real estate license, his notary commission, and served 18 months in a minimum security facility. Sylvia, the architect of the family's entitlement, was never criminally charged. She maintained plausible deniability, insisting she was just a supportive mother who didn't understand the legal mechanics of the transfer. But the legal fees to defend Julian bled her dry. She had to take out a reverse mortgage on her pristine suburban home, effectively destroying the Brooks family legacy she had spent her entire life obsessing over. Our divorce was finalized while Julian was awaiting sentencing. Because of his felony conviction regarding my assets, the judge awarded me everything. I kept the townhouse, I kept my retirement accounts, and most importantly, the quiet title action reversed the fraudulent quitclaim deed, returning Hayes Industrial LLC to its rightful owner. I never visited Julian in prison. I never responded to the venomous multi-page letters Sylvia sent to my office, accusing me of destroying her son's life. You cannot destroy a life that is built on a foundation of theft. You can only expose it to the wind. Last month, I drove down to New Jersey to visit the logistics park. It was a cold, gray Tuesday. The industrial park was loud, filled with the sounds of semi-trucks reversing, forklifts beeping, and men in high-visibility vests moving pallets of freight. I parked my car and stood in front of my father's 40,000-square-foot warehouse. It was exactly as he had left it. The corrugated steel roof was unglamorous. The concrete walls were stained with exhaust fumes. It wasn't a luxury lifestyle brand. It wasn't a venture-backed tech startup. It was just a box where the world put its things. But as I stood there, resting my hand against the cold, solid concrete, I felt a profound, unbreakable peace. My father was right. Nobody is ever going to write a magazine article about a steel roof. But when the storms come, when the liars panic, and when the paper illusions burn to the ground, the concrete is the only thing left standing. They thought they could steal my foundation because I was quiet. They forgot that a foundation doesn't need to make noise to hold up the world. It just needs to be stronger than the things trying to tear it down. That is my story. One forged operating agreement, one canceled insurance policy, and one manila folder that dismantled an entire family's empire of lies. If you have ever been told you are too quiet, or if someone in your life has mistaken your lack of drama for a lack of intelligence, take this as your reminder. You do not need to scream to be heard. You just need to keep the receipts. Let them build their castles out of paper. And when they finally try to take what is yours, hand them the match. Share this story with the quiet architects in your life. Type the word concrete in the comments if you stayed with me until the very end. Hit that subscribe button. Keep your boundaries reinforced, and I will see you in the next one.